My topic today is called Data Empowerment and the Opportunity State. And really the theme is about how can people and small businesses use their own data to advance their lives. It's really about how do we empower people with their own data. So let me just set some background. I think the last few years we have seen the rise of whole database businesses that use data to sell you ads and so on. And it all looked very fine and getting all these free services and enjoying it. But increasingly there's a lot more disquiet about what's happening, and recently we had the whole case of Cambridge Analytica and the whole issue of the US elections. And clearly it is beginning to look like a Faustian bargain where we give our data and we get ostensibly free services, but there are other implications which are now becoming obvious in the world. But this whole data trend is an inexorable trend. It's not going to stop. We are only at the beginning of this trend. Today we have 2.5 billion people in the planet who have a smartphone, and when everybody goes from a feature phone to a smartphone, the digital footprint they create goes up dramatically by order of 10 times. And we are just at the beginning of the Internet of Things revolution, where you're going to have sensors in everything. Your automobile will have sensors, your washing machine will have sensors, your Fitbit will have sensors, and so on. And the expectation is that you're going to have up to 50 billion sensors around the world. And those sensors combined with the new technology of 5G will allow you to have a lot of intelligence at the edge of systems that is collecting data and rapidly processing it. So the fact of the matter is the data is inexorable. The data, the avalanche, the deluge, the tsunami of data is a given. And we just have to figure out what do we do with this thing. And this has many implications, social implications. We are seeing that in elections and so on, political implications, business model implications, how do you make money, and technological implications of what has to be done. And this is not a situation which everybody has figured out. People are grappling with these issues, and different parts of the world are grappling with it differently. So all over the world, data is now the big question. The US, in UK, in EU, in China, in Japan, every country is trying to deal and cope with this whole data thing. And the strategic implications of this massive data deluge is still being handled, and people are coming to grips with what is required. So what we find is that there broadly seem to be 4 approaches in the world to data. In the US, by and large, it's been a laissez-faire approach, and companies have been allowed to collect data and so on. And only now there is some amount of questioning about what does this mean, and we have seen the hearings at the House and so on. And therefore, people are beginning to question whether we need to look at a framework for privacy, whether we need to have a framework for fake news, whether we need to have a framework for antitrust. All these questions are now being asked. So I think the US is dealing with these issues. In Europe has had a very different response. The Europeans have been far more concerned about the issue, especially of privacy and competition, for a longer time. And the culmination of their privacy journey has been the GDPR, which came out on May 25th, which for a long time in the US they said, oh, Europe is not able to create its own companies and therefore they're using regulatory measures. But now there's a more nuanced appreciation of the fact that something is required. And so GDPR is really a response. At the same time, we have yet to see the full implications of GDPR and whether in fact GDPR will be pro-incumbent. Will it reduce the ability of new innovations and allow actually large companies to become stronger? The whole question of whether GDPR is the right response. China has a very different response. It's, as you know, there's a great Chinese firewall which basically said that we don't allow Western companies to operate. So there's no Google, no Facebook in China, and you have domestic champions, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. And there's a very close focus on national security. You've been reading about how there's a face recognition camera at every traffic light, where there's a whole concept of social credit scores, the whole thing happening in Xinjiang province. So, there's a lot of stuff where there's, which is essentially national security oriented and so on. So they have a different view. And there are very strong requirements of localization. So if you're doing a business in China, you have to keep your data on local servers, and you have to allow the government, if they wish to have a look at the data. So fundamentally, it's a very different view of data, and there's also a commingling of business and national security. In India, we have a possible fourth approach, and I'll talk about that. And a lot of that was thanks to Aadhaar. Aadhaar became a constitutional matter. They argued whether privacy is a fundamental right, and then there was a judgment on fundamental right of privacy, and then a committee was set up under Justice Sri Krishna, which is now working on a draft law, which should come in the public domain in a matter of weeks, if not days. So really, you can think about four approaches: laissez-faire, regulatory oversight, national security, and so on, and what we think we like to call is the empowerment approach. In other words, India has the potential to offer a new way to think about data, which is not coming from any of these other three, but coming from the point of view of how do we use data for empowerment. Because the data is going to happen, as I explained, data is going to happen. Now, obviously, companies know how to use their data for profit. Countries know how to use their data for security. But can we think about how can individuals use the data for improving their lives? So that's the whole theme here. So in the meantime, India is going rapidly digital. 1.21 billion mobile connections, 1.2 billion Aadhaars issued, about close to 500 million internet users. We have close to 600 billion Aadhaar-linked bank accounts, which is the basis for the world's largest cash transfer program. 375 million social media users. Just the number of people on WhatsApp is about 300 million. So really, you're seeing dramatic, rolling out of digital platforms, and this has been enabled in some sense by what is called as the India Stack, which my friend Sharad here has coined as from iSPIRT. And India Stack is basically a set of digital public goods. In other words, these are public goods provided by government or government-allied institutions that allow everyone to have access to digital services. And you can think of this as a new set of layers above the internet. And they deal with the following. They deal with identity. So clearly 1 billion people now have an identity. They deal with digital authentication. So you can authenticate yourself online. You can do a KYC online, open a bank account, or get a mobile connection in real time. You can do payments online. You can do a signature online, so you have a loan application. You can sign it online using your e-sign. And you can also give consent to someone else to use your data in a particular way. So think of these as the 5 layers of what is called as the India Stack: identity, authentication, payments, signature, and consent. And all these are public goods, which means they're all available to every Indian. And this is very important and very strategic, because there's no country in the world which has really built these layers. Now, this is not something futuristic. This is in place right now and is actually being used at scale. 1.2 billion people have an ID, and if you add the fact that we have several hundred million bank accounts today, we are close to 1 billion bank accounts, or maybe at least 700-800 million people unique bank accounts, and the mobile phones again is over 1 billion. So think about a word which our friend Arvind Subramaniam helped to coin called JAM, Jandan Aadhaar Mobile, where every Indian will have a bank account to transact for money, an ID for verification and authentication, and a mobile phone for communication. Think of that word, and think of these layers operating on top of that. So already you are seeing the usage. Today the Aadhaar authentication system does about 40 million authentications a day. So about 1.2 billion authentications a month. This is a massive authentication system. Already the number of authentications happening on Aadhaar is 5 times the number of credit card transactions in India. You can see the scale of what's happening. Similarly, the eKYC is doing about, last year did 3.2 billion eKYC transactions. In other words, 3.2 billion times somebody used the Aadhaar eKYC to open a bank account, get a mobile connection or whatever. And it is now directly penetrating into the day-to-day activities. Bank accounts are being opened every day using eKYC. Paytm Bank, which is a new bank, does 300,000 eKYCs a day. When Reliance Jio was launched, it was launched entirely using eKYC, did 1 million a day. They were able to go to 100 million customers in 3 months using the fact that they could open a mobile connection in 2 minutes. So this is actually penetrating into the usage of everyone, and there is a recent State of the Aadhaar report which Omidyar has supported, which gives a lot of what's happening. So fundamentally, authentication and KYC is happening. The same thing is happening with payments. We have something called Unified Payment Interface, which is a very sophisticated peer-to-peer mobile payment system launched by NPCI. NPCI is a non-profit company collectively owned by all the banks and regulated by the central bank, by the RBI. This system, pre-demonetization, did 100,000 transactions. So in October of 2016, this system did 100,000 transactions. Now it's doing 200 million transactions. And this is just the beginning. And I would assume that in the next 12 to 18 months, it will do 1 billion transactions a month. And these transactions are low-cost transactions. Below a particular value, there's no transaction fee. So that means you really are going to start the process of moving transactions from cash to cashless, thanks to the UPI layer. And then I explained we have the signatures. Already 33 million signatures have been done using the e-sign. So people have, for example, signed their property records or signed their loan applications, all using digital signature of Aadhaar. So this again makes everything very simple to do. And then the consent layer provides a way to share data. And the government launched infrastructure called DigiLocker, which was launched by MeitY, which has 2.4 billion documents in it, including vehicle registrations and driver's license. So tomorrow, if you're stopped by the police, you can use on your phone, you can pull up your driver's license and show it to him. You don't need to carry it. So really you're seeing that because of this infrastructure, you can rapidly dematerialize documents and make the whole system paperless. So essentially this infrastructure enables you to do things paperless, cashless, and wherever you are. So we call it presence-less. And what's important is this is available to 1.2 billion Indians. This is available on their smartphone. This is available in real time. It's available for small amounts of data. And it essentially, because it's public infrastructure, it's cheap or free, and it's high volume. As I said, we do 1 billion transactions a month, and it's high trust because all data is identified at source, digitally signed, all that stuff. So this is a very unique infrastructure which is there in India, which enables people, everyone on their phone, to ask for the data for any purpose. That's really the fundamental requirement to create data empowerment. So what this means is that India and Indians will go from being data poor to data rich within the next 3 years. So as more people use phones, as more people use digital cash, as more people open bank accounts with KYC, their digital footprint is going up dramatically. Now it's important to realize that when your digital footprint is going up faster than your economic growth. So what happened in the United States and Europe was that the new models for business models with data began after these countries were already rich, in the sense that per capita incomes in the US, Europe, $40,000 to $50,000. And therefore the business models that emerged were those that use data to sell to you. So globally, in the US and Europe, advertising is a few $100 billion market. That market was there for these things. But in China, the advertising market is $50 billion. In India, the digital advertising market is just $2 billion. So clearly, those models of business don't make, there's not enough people to sell to with ads and so on. So fundamentally, that won't work. But on the other hand, the per capita income in India is say $1,800 or $2,000. The digital footprint of every Indian is going to be the same as that of a Western person. So what you're going to see is, unlike the West, where individuals became data rich after they were economically rich, and that data got used to sell to them, Indians will be data rich before they're economically rich. And therefore, if you are able to invert the data and put it in the hands of people so they can use that to improve their lives, then actually using data as a lever for societal development, because people can use their own data to move forward. But to do that, you need infrastructure that exists. And the infrastructure we have enables you to do that. So if you look at the global debate, a lot of it is about, in fact all of it is about protection, rightly so, because when you're generating massive amounts of data, the people who will have the earliest access to put that data to work is governments and companies, and therefore a large part of the conversation is about how do we protect individuals against the data being used by companies or governments. How do you ensure that you take their consent? How do you make sure the data is not used in a way inappropriate to what they have given the consent for? How do you hold companies accountable? How do you fine companies? GDPR provides a fine of up to 4% of revenue. So how do you fine companies so they don't do the wrong things? How do you make sure countries store data in a way that you don't create surveillance and so on? So a lot of the debate is about that, and rightly so. But we feel that it's not just about that. It's also about how do we treat this data as a strategic thing for individuals and small businesses to use for the future. In other words, how can we use data for empowerment? And we believe that India is in a unique place to put in place an architecture which allows people to use data for empowerment, and we can actually lead the world in how people can use data for the future, and that is going to be supported in different ways. So we need a new class of platforms, products, networks, laws that put the user at the heart of it and allow the user to use his data in a way that improves his life. Now, it also means that you need to make sure data is portable. Portable data means that I can take my data from one location and take it to another location. So data portability is very important. Historically, the internet was highly portable because we had open standards. Now, you don't have open standards. Different companies have different standards. So interoperability, data portability is an issue. Interoperability is also required because if you want to create innovation, then you need to allow new people to come in, and new people can't interoperate with the old people, then you have a challenge. So all these things are required architecturally, and these have to be defined so that we create a more meaningful choice for everyone. So, but specifically coming to empowerment, what we have in India is something called the Data Empowerment Architecture, Data Empowerment Protection Architecture. And this is based on three different things. Technology, which says who can use my data and why. Business model, how to make sure that business model, my data is not misused, and the incentive alignment of the business of the tech provider with me, and law, how to make sure. So in some sense, you have to work simultaneously on the technology, the business model, on the law. And the good news is that, and a lot of it happened due to serendipity, is that all these three are coming together right now. And therefore, we are laying the infrastructure for a whole new way of looking at data, which is unprecedented anywhere in the world. Let me first talk about the technology. Now, I already mentioned the whole India stack and all that. So India stack is essential to do this. But we also have concepts called registries, where you have registries are essentially databases which are API, you can call them and so on. You can have a registry, for example, the central bank can have a registry of banks and other people, or the healthcare system can have a registry of hospitals. It's a way to basically organize your data in a much more reliable and trustable manner. And then you have something called electronic consent. This, I'm sorry to show you the slide, but it's there. It's technology, it's XML. But what is important for you to recognize here is this is probably the first time anywhere that we are now coming out with a way of expressing consent in a programmatic way. In other words, the way normally you consent is that you log on to one of your apps and they have this complicated 5-page privacy agreement and you say, I agree, and you don't know what's happening. Whereas really if you want consent, consent has to be structured, consent has to be programmable. And this is in some sense, think of this as programmable consent, which is open, which is revocable, which means I can cancel my consent. It's very granular. I can say at this level of data I give consent. It can be auditable, so you can keep track of the consents that you give. It can be secure, and it can be, you get a notification whenever your data is being used. So all these things are ways to make consent happen. And this is not, again, this is something which has already been done by the government. MeitY, the Ministry for Information Technology, has already issued the electronic consent architecture, which encapsulates all this, and that basically provides a sort of a framework to give consent for what you want to do with your data. And it really provides a structure and standardization, and it has a whole host of features. I won't go into that, but I think this is the first attempt anywhere to put a framework on how you give consent, and which we think is and it's all highly abstracted and granular, so that you can come up with different ways of giving consent. So technology therefore has the India stack, which gives you the ability to ask for data. It has registries which are trustable sources of data, and it has consent, which allows you to stipulate what you're willing to do. Now, in the payments world, if you look at UPI, you don't transfer money without consent. I mean, obviously, if you want to transfer money from your account, you have to give consent to the bank. It will be crazy if your account is debited. So we're used to the notion in money that it's my money, and my money can only be taken from my account with my permission. And that's what something like UPI does. It gives the consent to transfer money, and then you take the money from the issuing bank account and send it to the receiving bank account. So that model is very clear to us, that money is our money, nobody can take it from me, and it will only be transferred based on my permission. So that's what it does in money. But can we apply the same thing to data? Can we think of data in the same way? In other words, if there is like somebody who's a consent collector, I give the consent saying, take the data from this data provider and give it to this data consumer, using a registry of data providers and data consumers. So it's important to think that if we treat data like money, is there a way for me to give consent on how my data is used? And this is what is about creating a consent architecture. And the consent itself is using that consent framework I talked about earlier, which is very structured in what the consent is given for, and so on. So this is the broad idea of how you think of it. Now this is an abstraction, but this abstraction can be applied to different industries. So we are saying that this abstraction can be applied to financial services. This abstraction can be applied to healthcare. This abstraction can be applied to skills. It can be applied to telecom data, and so on. So fundamentally, this is not so much about how your social media data is done. This is about data which has implications for your life. The data which helps you to get access to credit. The data which gives you access to better healthcare. The data that gives you a better job. The data that gives you access to your telecom records. This is the data that we're talking about, and a lot of these data are regulated or come under some framework. So this is an abstraction of how this thing will work. But let's look at specifics. Then there's the whole issue of business model. It's not sufficient to have technology. You need to have a business model where all this gets used and you create the momentum for usage. And the business model has to be created very thoughtfully as some kind of a public good, in the sense the infrastructure, the level playing field has to be created through regulation and so on. And it should be built as a public good, it should allow competition and so on and so forth, make sure the monopolies don't get created and so on. So there's a whole issue of how do we create these public goods. Because if you don't do that, then you end up with the kind of problem we have today, where you have these large databases which have all your data and you can't move out. So we need to make sure that we do that properly. So there is therefore a new class of entities which is emerging, which the word for that is a data fiduciary. A data fiduciary is someone who acts on your behalf with your data, and the economic incentives of a data fiduciary are aligned with you. And this is the new concept that's emerging. And the good news is that India is already moving on the path of creating these data fiduciaries, which operate on your behalf and handle your data with your permission, with your consent. And therefore, the data fiduciary is the entity which sits in the middle of this, which acts as the switch between data from your provider to your consumer with your consent. This, think of it as a new concept, the concept of a data fiduciary. And where it is now actually happening, as we speak, is in the area of financial services. And there is something which is called as a financial data fiduciary. And this is actually leveraging an instrument that our regulators have created called the account aggregator. So the account aggregator is actually a class of regulated entities that have been defined, which will be licensed to become these data fiduciaries. And what they do is they will, on one side, they will talk to various organizations where my data is. It could be my bank or my mutual fund or my insurance company or the tax system. And these are called as financial information providers. They are the source of data, my data. So it's my data. And these are users of the data. So it could be a lender to get a loan. It could be a wealth manager to make an investment. It could be my personal finance application to keep track of my things. It could be my tax advisor to compute my tax. So I can use my consent to ask these providers to give my data to these guys. So the financial system, so there's already a concept of account aggregator, and the account aggregator is now being, it's going to have all these features, and a lot of the work has been done. Revit, Nankumar is here, so Revit has been leading the tech charge along with colleagues from iSPIRT. So it's fundamentally a whole new world. And the good news is the financial, this entity called account aggregator comes under the FSDC, the Financial Stability and Development Council, which, as you know, is a group of all regulators chaired by the finance minister. So the central bank has been authorized by this FSDC to create an account aggregator concept which applies to all regulators. So good news is that with this NBFC AA, all regulators will use this framework. So data can come from my bank, from my mutual fund, from my insurance company, my pensions, from your bankruptcy guys, whoever. So fundamentally, this is very important because this is the first time anywhere in the world you have an architecture for data, consent, getting my data in a structured manner to give it to somebody else. And this is across all categories. Now, there have been many attempts elsewhere to do this in a rudimentary manner. For example, in the UK, there is open banking approach, which is how to get banks to give their statement to a customer. In Europe, they have something called PSD2, Payment System Directive 2, which is trying to do something similar. In US, the Dodd-Frank Act provides for customers to get their own data back from the bank. But no one has tried to do it in a strategic, structured way which cut across all financial providers, which can provide to all financial consumers in a structured manner using consent. This doesn't exist. So this really is because here we are bringing everything together. Now, these data fiduciaries cannot see the data. They're just switching the data from provider to consumer. So the data is end-to-end encrypted. So this fiduciary cannot actually read that data. It's like a WhatsApp message which is encrypted and goes through. And therefore they can't make money from selling data because they don't have data. But therefore the business model is more about transactional. They're going to make money on transactions. And therefore they don't have a way to use the data which goes to them, which aligns the incentives and ensures that, the data is not stored by them. It's a switch. So if I want to do something, I just say send data from here to here, and that happens in real time. So it's not that they're collecting data, they're just acting as a switch of data. So I'll give you this is a mock-up that my colleagues have created, Siddharth and all that. So suppose there's an account aggregator. On my phone, I can go give my mobile number, give my password, and register with this account aggregator. So it's all on your smartphone. can do it self-service. And the central bank will license multiple account aggregators, just like they have multiple NBFCs, and you can choose any account aggregator and they will compete, and you will select that. So that's how it's a very simple way to register with an account aggregator. They just did a mock-up for you just to give a sense of what we're talking about. And then you can select from which all places you want your data to be provided. So you can say go to these bank accounts or whatever, and you can select multiple bank accounts or multiple mutual funds and just say link these accounts to my account aggregator, and then the bank will then do a verification, because this is a read-only function. This is not updating your bank account. This is not changing the balances. This is only saying authorizing the account aggregator to connect to those banks to get my data, and the appropriate authentication is done using OTPs and passwords and so on. So then you have connected your provider to your account aggregator. And then you go to get a loan. So you go to friends in Kota and say, I want to apply for an education loan, and you say, take my data, get this account aggregator to give me my data, and you can give the consent. And then the account aggregator gets the request, and this is the request. So this is the consent architecture. It says the consumer of the data is Kotak Bank, the user is Sharad, transaction type, it's revocable, which means I can revoke this thing. This consent applies only for 6 months. The purpose is educational loan, and the provider is SBI or whatever. So you can have multiple providers. And then you can consent to share, which means you're giving consent now to collect this data from the other bank with these consent artifacts, and you give it to the Kotak, which then does all its machine learning, all that, and says, oh, this guy has a good track record, let me give him a loan. So all this happens in real time. So this is how it would work, that you actually can, in real time, take data for 1 billion people, billions of transactions from A to B, and make sure they can use the data. So this is an example of how it will work in the financial sector. But the same thing can be done in telecom. So the telecom regulator can say, I can get my history of my mobile prepaid charges, or I can get my my list of contacts or my behavior. It's all consent based. It's all telecom. Same thing can be applied. The same thing can be done in healthcare. So tomorrow, healthcare, I can say that I go to a doctor for a specialist for some second opinion. I can say get my test from the diagnostic lab, get my X-ray from here, get my last visit, and get all that data and give it to the doctor one time to have a look. And he looks at it and says, you have this issue. So fundamentally, you can apply it to healthcare and invert the data and put it in the hands of the user. Or if you do it in skills, how can we, you talk about the whole job creation and skills. How can people get better jobs? How can they monetize their skills? How can they take up new degrees and then new learnings and then get paid better? So you can do the same thing for skills. And so the same architecture. The important thing is conceptually it's one concept, but applied to financial services, healthcare, telecom, skills. So I talked about the tech, I talked about the business model. Then clearly the third piece of this is the law. As you know, you need a law, and the Supreme Court has recognized the fundamental right to privacy. They have said the fundamental right to privacy is there. However, the state can constrain that. They are given 4 situations where they can: protection of revenue, law and order, national security, and disbursement of benefits. So they're given an infrastructure framework, and there's that when you do constrain privacy for these 4 reasons, it has to be accompanied by a law, it has to be proportional and reasonable. That's the framework they will use to judge whether something is going to be, is violates or not. And that framework will now, the first test of that is the Aadhaar case, which is currently the judgment has been reserved, and the judgment should come before October 2nd. So in the meantime, the Sri Krishna Committee is coming out with the law. So all these things that I'm talking about are happening as we speak. And we believe that the law will emphasize data empowerment, because our challenge in India is not just about protection. Of course, we must have protection, but it's more than that. Is there a way to flip this around and empower people to use their data for their own advantage? That's really a whole new idea that is coming up. So an example is a small business can get GST transactions, his bill payment transactions, give it to a lender and get credit. You have this whole issue of, Arvind talked about twin balance sheet problem. But while we have the twin balance sheet problem, we also have, the reality is that our credit is not really penetrated. Our small businesses and our individuals don't get access to credit. All the big guys get access to credit and then they push off. They go somewhere else. So how do we deal with that? So this will deepen the credit market. It will allow millions of small businesses. Today the GST system has 10 million businesses, of which 6 million are B2B businesses. Imagine if those businesses can now get loans from the financial system using their own data. Suddenly they become credit worthy. And that means they will be able to grow. When they are able to grow, they will be able to create jobs. So fundamentally this is important for job creation and economic growth. And therefore, this infrastructure we have just defined can be used to enable that to happen. So the GST system will be one more financial information provider that plugs into the account aggregator, which allows you to give it to a lender to get a loan for yourself. Or job seeker can do that. As we talked about, Jay talked about platforms and so on. But if I have a market platform, how do I use my data? If I may be a driver on Uber who has an excellent record of driving, and then I want to go and work for some other Ola or something, and then I will be able to take my driving sort of history with me when I go to Ola, and I get a better deal. And therefore, how do we create these kind of things? So you can do that for job seekers. So fundamentally, I think what we are talking about is going beyond the classical arguments. Classical arguments is how do we protect people from their data being misused by companies or government, which is a very valid concern, and therefore a lot of the work in privacy is about that. But let's flip the conversation around and say, fine, we absolutely have to make sure that we have the right privacy framework. We absolutely have to make sure that companies are accountable for data. We have to make sure that your consent is taken for your data. We have to make sure that governments use the data properly. All that is absolutely given. But beyond that, given the fact that there is going to be this massive deluge of data which is going to come from all those phones and Internet of Things and all that, and that data is actually my data as a consumer, can I now have an infrastructure, a technology, a business model, a law which allows me to use my data to improve my life, get a better loan, get better job, get better healthcare, get better skills, so on. How can I do that? And if you can do that, then this becomes an instrument of development. You're actually leveraging data to move the country forward so that people get access to better services, better income, improve their life. That's what is happening in India, this inversion of data. Not from a corporate point of view or a government point of view, but from the individual's point of view. This requires technology, this requires institutional business models and entities, it needs law. The good news is all these things are falling into place, and you will see a significant use of this approach in the next couple of years. Thank you very much.